Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, Making Your Charts a Work of Art. I'm Christine Irons. I will be running the presentation today, or the webinar today. And I've been working for CompuEase and Great Canadian Training now for 4 or 5 years. And just a little bit of information for you. As of October 1st, we will just be under the Great Canadian Training and Consulting Company. We use Great Canadian Training for short. So starting October 1st, the two companies just merge into the one company. And before I was working for Great Canadian Training, I was in Toronto working for York University for many, many years, basically doing the same type of thing, computer support, help desk, teaching computer courses, writing courseware. So I have many, many years of experience with this and just happy to be doing it with Great Canadian Training here in Ottawa. So what are we going to cover today in today's webinar? We are going to start with why visual. I mean, I could teach you how to create charts, the technical aspects of creating a chart, step 1, step 2, step 3. But if I can't convince you to actually use charts and why you should be using visual representations of your data over just presenting your data, you won't, most people will not use charts. They'll just use their data. So we'll talk about why visual. Second thing we'll do is we'll look at some key principles, things to think about when you're creating charts. Then we'll do a fun little section on the good, the bad, and the ugly. So I'll show you some examples of charts that are good, some bad, and some sort of downright ugly. Then we will get into some key questions that you have to ask yourself before you actually create your charts. And then what I'll do is I'll go through, I have pictures of all the different types of charts that you can choose from in Excel. And I'll go through and explain to you what the charts are for, what they look like and what the charts are for. Because it is really important that you choose the right chart to tell your story. And that's what charts do. They tell a story. So I'll go through the different charts. And because we're recording this webinar today, it's not live, I think that I will have time also to show you actually how to create a chart. So the steps involved in creating a chart. So I will get into the technical side of it and just give you a sort of a quick and dirty on creating charts from scratch. Get you going, get you on your feet. Okay. So let's start with why visual. Other than visualizations are more attractive, why are we taking our data and turning it into a picture? Well, first of all, 30 to 50% of our brain is devoted to visual processing. Humans are wired to be visual. We process images up to 60,000 times faster than data. And there's something called the picture superiority effect. You'll learn 60% of something if you learn it with images versus 6% without images. So you actually get 10 times the result if you take your data and turn it into a picture. It's all brain science. It's basically how humans are. So data visualizations is just a fancy name for charts in Excel. Data visualizations is about maximizing impact and minimizing the noise, the clutter. It doesn't matter how proficient you are in creating charts. If you don't know how to effectively tell a story, all that technical work is meaningless. So first of all, number 1, clarity. Don't be one of those people who adds all of the bells and whistles to their chart, or they try to plot 6 or 7 or 8 data series on the same axis just because it's an option. At the end of the day, If it doesn't add value or serve a purpose, get rid of it. Second thing, narrative. Data visualizations isn't just about showing data. It's like I said before, it's telling a story. Make sure you're communicating your key insights clearly, quickly, and powerfully. And number 3, design and function. So strike a balance between the design side and the function side. So selecting the right type of chart is critical. Okay, but design is important as well. So there is that sort of balance. Remember, beautiful is good, functional is better, but both is ideal. Okay, so I'm going to do something here now because this is recorded. I can't have you sort of do this with me, but while you're sitting watching this recording, try this out yourself, okay? I have a rule called the 10-second rule. If you can't interpret the story that a chart is trying to tell in 10 seconds, it's time to simplify your chart. So I'm going to show you 2 different charts. I'll start with the first one here, and I'll give you 10 seconds to look at it and see if in 10 seconds you can explain what the story is that I'm trying to tell. Ready? I'll count to 3 and then I'll start the 10-second timer. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so 10 seconds is up. So you may have worked it out. We're trying to plot average temperatures by city and month. And it's trying to tell the story that certain cities follow one pattern while others follow another pattern. But realistically, 10 seconds is not a lot of time to figure out a chart like this. So I'm going to try it again with you. I'll give you 10 seconds and show you the chart. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so 10 seconds. So you can see, well, it's basically the same data, but just doing something like applying some data visualization techniques like custom formatting. This was actually done with conditional formatting. So there is no heat map chart type in Excel. It doesn't exist, but you do it through conditional formatting. And using conditional formatting and then also combining that with intuitive color scales, like we know that we just associate red with hot, blue with cold, that type of thing. So it just comes to us naturally now. And then eliminating those raw data points that we saw in the other chart, we can actually sort of draw attention to the story at hand, which is the relative trend and pattern that we see per city. So the 3 points: focus on clarity and simplicity. Okay, we made it simple with this chart. Create a narrative and strike a balance between design and function. Okay, so we'll get into the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm going to show you, I think it's 3 charts here. I'll show you 3 charts that would be considered good charts. Now, one of them, I think the first one is a chart that comes with Excel, but you'll see the next 2 charts that I show you are actually customized charts. I'll explain them when we get to them. But the first chart it's kind of like an area chart. So it's sort of clean, simple, overlapping area chart. And what's really neat about this chart too is up here at the top where it says select a year, 2011, and it has those arrows. It's dynamic, so you can actually change the year and you see the animation of the chart change. I actually show you how to do things like this in the dashboards course. When I teach a dashboards course, I teach you how to put form controls on that can actually control your charts. Kind of cool. The second chart. Now, this is a custom chart. So this is what I was kind of talking about a minute ago. There is a way to create custom charts where you combine the regular charts that come with Excel, and then if you know how to work with graphics, if you've ever used graphics like shapes and fill colors and lines in PowerPoint or Word or Excel, it doesn't matter, it's all the same thing. You can combine those shapes and combine them with the actual charts to create some really cool looking charts that don't actually exist in Excel. I'll show you an example of some of them at the end of this webinar, but this is one of them. So it's a custom built pacing chart. We're looking at revenue over time against a goal or a target. So it's using some sort of clever dynamic formatting rules to shade different colors based on whether we're under pacing or over pacing, but it can be done. Or this is another custom chart. It's called a gauge chart. And it's, again, it's a working chart. You just have to know how to combine graphics with charts. So it's a chart that it's just intended to show one thing, like where a particular value falls on a range. So in this case, it's from 0 to 100%. But it's a nice example of how to combine chart types and custom shapes. Okay, now we'll get into the bad. And just to let you guys know, I'm not picking on anybody's charts, like bad charts that they've created. I'm not critiquing anybody's charts. These were actually found on the internet, and they were set up to be bad charts, just to show you what a bad chart is. So here's one. I mean, it looks pretty when you first look at it, but looking at it, are you learning anything from this sort of pseudo pie chart? I mean, what do the colors even mean? Do the colors, they've got blue, they've got a sort of a browny gray color and a green. Does that mean something? There's no legend to indicate what it means. Why is it divided into quadrants? I don't think we'll ever know the answer to this. And then this one, I mean, this one was found in the really bad data competition of 2019. It's just, I probably don't even have to explain it to you, but it's busy. There's no function. It's all design. I've looked at this for a while trying to figure this one out. And then the downright ugly. So here's a case where there are too many elements and it's a distracting 3D design. And yes, 3D in some cases, like sometimes I will do a 3D pie chart, but 3D is distracting and it also doesn't represent your data very well. And add to that the ugly graphics in the background, that makes it even more difficult to read. And then this chart, I had to laugh at this chart. The misleading y-axis chart. So the y-axis is the axis that runs vertically up and down, that's showing the different heights. The x-axis is the one that's horizontal along the bottom, that's showing, you know, the different countries. But if I asked you how tall women from India were compared to a Latvian woman, you'd say about a sixth of the size. So basically, women from India are about 1 foot tall, basically, if you look at this chart. But it's because of the way they set up this y-axis. If you look at the bottom, the 5 foot mark starts about 1 inch up. And then it's not consistent because just up from the 5 foot mark, you only jump 1 inch. It jumps at an inch at a time. So because it started at the 5 foot mark, it makes it look like somebody from India is a sixth of the size. So you've got to think about things like this when you plot your data series. So the questions that you need to ask yourself before you start building or designing or playing with your data visualizations are, number one, what type of data are you working with? This is going to have a huge impact in determining what type of data visualization or chart you're going to actually use. So if it's something like you have categorical data, like I'm going to show you some examples where Instead of showing every individual ticket sales for movies, every time somebody buys a ticket, it's grouped together into the genres of movies, like how many tickets were purchased for horror, how many purchased for romance, documentary, that type of thing. That's categories. So when you have categorical data, those work really well with things like column charts or bar charts. Those are great. If it's time series data, like if it's over month by month by month, maybe temperatures by month, line charts are great for those. Geospatial data, like if you have things like population densities, those lend themselves well to things like map. There is something called Powermap. I'll show you a quick example of that when we get into the charts. Second thing is, what are you trying to communicate? Like, what is the story you're trying to get across? I keep mentioning that to you. So are you trying to tell a story about a relationship between 2 or 3 or 4 different things kind of thing? Are you trying to show a comparison? Are you trying to show composition, like how the composition has changed over time? Things like a stacked column chart, a pie chart, that type of thing would work for that. And then who is the end user? That actually is very important, because the type of visualization that you build for a fellow analyst will look very different than the visualization that you build for a CEO. So you have to keep in mind who the end user is that's going to look at your charts. Okay, so now what we'll do, that gives you an idea of what you should think about before you actually create your charts. But then you need to know what the different types of charts are. I'll tell you, if you're a 365 user, like I use Excel 365, I'm going to have all the charts available to me, all the different chart types. I haven't actually counted. I think there may be around 15 different chart types, but then there are subtypes as well. So it splits up into subtypes of main chart types. If you're using Excel 2016, you have most of the chart types, maybe minus 2 or 3 of them that they added to 365. If you're using something like 2013 or earlier, then you're missing probably 5, 6, 7 different types of chart types. So as you guys upgrade to the newer versions of Excel, you will have more chart types available. So what I'm doing is I'm showing you about the 15 different types of charts that you would have available to you if you were in the 365 version, because eventually you will upgrade to 365 or to the newer versions, 2019 kind of thing. Basically the same thing. So I'm going to start with bar and column charts. This is a very standard type of chart, a very common type. You will have it in all the versions of Excel, bar and column charts. There really is not much of a difference between a bar chart, which you see as the first chart up here, and a column chart, which you see down at the bottom. Bar charts are basically column charts just flipped on their sides. So it gives you more room if you have longer labels. Like these labels, romance, documentary, thriller, they're not that long, but sometimes you do have long labels. And if you flip it on its side, you have more room to put the labels than if you try to put them along the bottom. You're kind of squished for the amount of room that you have labels. You have to kind of slant them to try to fit them in, but they're basically the same chart. So like I said earlier, these are great for comparing different groups or different categories of information. The example that I gave you with the movies, by romance, documentary, thriller. Histogram. A histogram chart is the first one you see up here. Down here is a Pareto chart. Histogram charts are for things like if you have a lot of data, like if I had people's heights in inches, but I had a lot of people, maybe I had 200, 300, 400 records of people's names and their heights in inches. what a histogram chart will do is it will group information together for you. So it has to do with frequency, like how many people fall into the, for example, here you see the 67 to 68 inch height. So it'll actually go through all your data and find everybody that falls between 67 and 68 inches. And it will tell you how frequent that is. And then between 68 and 69, how frequent that is. And it builds up to the most frequent in the middle. I don't know what I'd have to move this chart to see, but I don't know, 72, 73 inches. That seems very tall. Yeah, that seems very tall. But anyway, the most frequent in the middle and then back down again to the least frequent. So you have the outliers on each side. So the shortest to the, this is short, to the tallest on the right, and then the most frequent in the middle. And Pareto charts are the same kind of thing. It's like a histogram, but it reorders the columns to the tallest to the shortest. Or actually, no, it's sorry, from the shortest to the tallest. There are more people that are this height than there are down to the 82, 83. I've got to check out this data because those are very tall people. And then it adds this line, which is basically a line of cumulative values. It is very difficult to explain histogram and Pareto charts. We do have a mastering charts in Excel course that's a full day course on just charts, and we actually go through and create each type of chart, and it's explained much better. You can actually see what's happening in the mastery charts. Obviously, in a webinar, I can't get into that much detail, but this sort of gives you a basic overview. And then you have the line chart. Line charts are available in all the versions of Excel. This is another very standard chart. Line charts are great for tracking changes over periods of time. So you could do something like, I know this is daily closing prices, I guess stock prices, but it could be things like temperatures across the months. So you could have January, February, March across the bottom, all the way to December, and then your temperatures up the side, and you could be tracking where the temperatures fall across the months. And with line charts, you can add something called trend lines to them. That's what you see. This dotted line is trend lines. There are different types of trend lines, but what you can do with trend lines is you can actually extend the trend lines. So it sort of averages out over the time where your averages are. And then what you can do is you can say, well, this is the trend line from January to December, but I want to see approximately, based on my past numbers, where I might be next May. So take a look at all my past numbers and figure it out where I might be when it comes to May, 5 months down the road, kind of thing. Area charts. Area charts are kind of like, it's kind of like a combination of column charts. There's a type of column chart that looks like this called a stacked column chart, and a line chart. If you can imagine a line chart. But what it does is it kind of merges it all together into one big chunk. So you see down at the bottom, the legend at the bottom, the dark blue area down here is comedy. So we're back to the movie tickets, comedy. Then you have thriller, then documentary and romance. And it's ticket sales by month. And it fills in the information. So you can imagine this being a line chart, this line that's running here for the ticket sales for comedy, but then it fills it in with color. So it makes it sort of visually more appealing and easier to read. And pie charts and donut charts, again, you'll have those available in any version. They've been around for a long time. And I used to think donut charts were the same as pie charts, except you had a donut hole in the middle, but they are slightly different, which I'll explain in a second. But a pie chart, what a pie chart is it compares a bunch of little pieces to the whole. So what you could do is maybe for the month of January specifically, you want to compare your ticket sales by your genre, your horror, your documentary, whatever, to the whole. It's good for one series of information, meaning maybe I want to compare my profits for north, south, east, west, just profits for north, south, east, west, not profits or revenue, expenses, not a bunch of different categories. It's just one series of information. Whereas a donut charts are like pie charts, except that it allows you to add extra series of information. So this center series, it's hard to read. It does say cost. These are your costs for, I guess, sales for electronics, toys and games, houseware, apparel. But then the outer circle, again, it's for apparel, electronics, toys, and games, but this is the revenue. So it's two different series of information for your apparel, electronics, toys, and games, and houseware, costs and revenue. And you can add another loop or whatever you want to call it, and another series of information. So these donut charts can grow bigger and bigger. Pie charts, you can't do that. It's one series. Scatter plots. Scatter plots, you can see it's made up of a whole bunch of little dots. Like you see a bunch of these blue dots. The idea is not to be able to read every tiny little dot. That's not the idea of a scatter plot. A scatter plot is to try to show you whether there's a correlation or a relationship between two sets of values. So for example, I mean, this is showing you Major League Baseball wins compared to run differential. And I'll show you the difference between these two in a minute. But, if you have more runs, is it more likely that you would have wins? But I think a better example is ice cream sales compared to temperatures. So if you want to see if the temperature has a correlation between how much you make in ice cream sales, like maybe the hotter months you sell more ice cream, the colder months you sell less ice cream, you want to see if there's a correlation. That's what a scatter plot will do. So what you do is when you create the scatter plot, if you look at the top one here, if you see that the little dots are kind of spread out a lot like this compared to this little trend line that's put on here, then it means that there's probably not much of a correlation between the two subjects that you're trying to compare. And when you add a trend line like this, you can add what's called an R squared value. It's just a setting for a trend line where you say, yes, add the R squared value. But the R squared value here, where you see 0.26, 0.2642, think of it like a percentage, 26%. Something that has an R squared value of 26%, that's not very high, it most likely means there is no correlation between the two things that you're comparing. Whereas if you look down here at the bottom, if you see a very tight fit between these little blue dots and this trend line that we put on, and the R squared value is jumped up to 87%, 0.87, then there is a good chance that there is a correlation between these two subjects. It doesn't mean that it's 100% correlation. It just means that, yes, there's a good chance there's a correlation. And then a bubble chart is like the scatter plot that I just showed you, but it adds a third dimension. It adds size. So you can actually compare three things. Like the examples they give you here, you can compare product sales to the revenue to the market share, which would be the size. So it just adds that third dimension. But you try not to, because you're adding that third dimension, you don't want to compare a lot of data. Like the previous one, the scatter plot, this could have been Major League Baseball over 6 seasons worth, a lot of data. For something like a bubble chart, you would probably just compare one season. or you wouldn't be able to read. Even this at one season, it's hard to read with the text that's on the sides of the bubbles here. And then box and whisker charts. I know it sounds funny, box and whisker. These are kind of newer, but I think they're available in 2016. What they do is they show you a spread over a center. So in this case, these are different, we'll go back to baseball. So these are different baseball players and their home runs. And this could have been based on, I don't know, 5 seasons worth of information. So if you look at Chris Davis, for example, the X in the middle is usually like where his average is, where he usually for home runs gets. Maybe he gets about 40 home runs a season usually. But basically what you're doing with this is you're trying to look for outliers. Like where you see these little lines that come off the blue rectangles, those are outliers. If you look at Chris Davis, he doesn't have some really extended outliers. The one that's up here is showing, obviously he had a season where he did have just over 50 home runs. He also had a season where he had under 30 home runs, but really his average is 50. But if you look at Mike Trout, he has an outlier here where his average is up, looks like it's, I don't know, 28 approximately home runs a season, but he had a really bad season at some point where it looks like he maybe had 5 home runs one season. But then you look at Chris Dutton, where he had a really good season compared to what his average usually is. There was the season where he had amazing at 70, whatever that is, 75 home runs, but that's out of the ordinary. That's an outlier. Tree maps and sunburst charts. These are newer. So the tree map is what you see up here. The sunburst chart is down here below. I'll start with the tree map chart. They're similar, but what it does is we go back to the movies by genre, but it lets you show, see if I can pronounce this correctly, hierarchical. It's hard to say. It shows hierarchies. So if you have groups of data and you have groups within groups within groups kind of thing. So in this case, the whole blue area, we can't see underneath this chart, but this whole area here is blue, which is horror. And the blue area is bigger than the red area. The red area is comedy, which is bigger than the yellowy orange area, which is drama. So right off, you can see that horror is the most popular, comedy is second, drama is third, sci-fi is fourth. But then within that category, horror, you have the different movies. So you can see Clown Parade 3. I don't even know if these are real movies, but you can see that had the most ticket sales compared to Ezekiel. I think I said it right. I asked Melanie if that's how you pronounce it. Ezekiel Strikes Back has the next most. So groups within groups. And you can do the same thing with the sunburst chart. Now the text on this isn't very good, but it's groups within groups. I think these are different people within different departments, maybe their salaries or number of employees, but this would have to be made more readable with their actual names. I probably turned their names sideways so you could read their names. Waterfall charts. Waterfall charts are really for balance sheets. It has to do with balance sheets. So it'll show you things like your positive and negative and where your balance is. And it tells you down here, the blue is increase, the red is decrease, and the orange is total at that time for different departments. So it really has to do with balance sheets. There are some charts like this that are very specific to specific types of data. Sometimes you have data that you can choose from 5 or 6 different charts. You could tell the story. Some data, you're stuck with one type or 2 types kind of thing. Funnel charts are, and this again is a newer type of chart, but it shows stages of something. So in this case, this is a marathon. It's the progress of a marathon as you go to the 5K, 10K, halfway mark type of thing. So the story that this is telling is obviously at the start, 100% of the people start. But once you reach the 5K mark, you're pretty close to still 100% being there at the 5K mark. Only 1% drops off. By the time you get to the 10K mark, 12% of people have dropped off. And what this story is really telling, if you look at the end part here, most people that make it to mile 25 will make it to the finish. Only 2% of people drop off between the mile 25 and the finish. So it's progress through stages, like a funnel. And then you have radar charts. I think these are kind of neat. Again, these are newer charts, and I'll use the one at the bottom to explain it. But a radar chart plots different variables. So in this case, I guess they had a personality test, and there were 5 different categories of personality. So there was openness, conscientiousness, neuroticism, extroversion, and agreeableness. And they tested 3 different people, Tim, Katie, and George, on these 5 different areas of personality traits. So the radar chart, the gray outline that you see at the outer part here, is going to take the shape of based on how many categories of information. So because we had 5, it creates a pentagon. So there's your sort of standard shape, the pentagon with the 5 different areas. Then it plots where each of these people falls in their categories within that pentagon. So for example, you can see Katie. She leans towards agreeableness, openness, extroversion. Not so much. She really doesn't have much when it comes to neuroticism and conscientiousness. Whereas George is almost the opposite of Katie. He leans definitely towards conscientiousness, neuroticism, not so much to openness, agreeableness, and extroversion kind of thing. So you can see that these two are almost opposites. And then you have Tim, who he almost follows that pentagon. He leans a little bit towards the agreeableness, but he is basically even rounded in all 5 of these. So I think this is pretty neat, these radar charts. Stock charts specifically for stocks. So when you have things like opens and closes and highs and lows, and it's kind of a combination of your column charts and your box and whisker that I was showing you. I won't get into too much. It's very, very much related to stocks. And then, as I mentioned before, you could create heat maps using conditional formatting, and then use that intuitive color scale. Like for temperatures, you know, we think of red meaning hot, blue meaning cool. Or down here, this is accident reports based on days of the week. I know that sounds bad, but accident reports based on days of the week. So you just associate red with bad, green with good here. So you can see where the higher amount of accidents are, the times of the day across the weeks compared to the lower. Of course, 4 a.m. in the morning, every day of the week is one of the lowest times for accidents. But you can see that right away. Surface and contour charts, they are a newer chart again. They're more pretty than they are functional. It's actually harder to read. So same kind of chart, accident frequency, but it's turned into a surface or contour chart. And it's actually more difficult to see when the high times and low times are, just because of, I think because of that 3D effect. And then I mentioned to you that there is something called Powermap. So in Excel, I don't know if any of you have heard of Powermap, Power Pivot, Power Query, Power View. There are all these different Power apps that you can actually use right inside Excel. Powermap is one of them. And Powermap actually comes with 365. If for something like 2013, you'd have to add it as an add-on, but you can do it. It's just that it comes with 365. And it's really cool because you could do things like plot population densities on a map. I should have used Canada instead of the United States, since most of us that are probably watching this are Canadian, but this gives you an idea so you can see where your higher densities are compared to your lower densities, which would be the lighter colors. And then I mentioned to you that you can also create those custom data visualizations where if you know how to use graphics like shapes and shape fills and lines and gradients and things like that we use in Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, you can combine them with your charts and create some really cool looking custom charts that don't exist in Excel. And by the way, I just finished writing the custom data visualizations course. So we now actually have a one-day course where I teach you how to work with the graphics, how to create the charts, and then how to combine them into creating some of these custom data visualizations. Like we'll create this sort of male and female thing where it fills up and goes down, gauge charts like this. There are a bunch that we can create, and you'll get the idea of how to do that, how to combine your graphics with your charts. And it's great for dashboards, doing these custom ones. So those are your charts. Now, the nice thing is I actually have some time right now to just quickly show you in Excel, like get you on your feet, how to create a chart in Excel. So I chose to use, because I like going to movies, I chose to use the data that we had for the different movie genres, the comedies, thrillers, documentaries across the months to create a chart. The easiest way to create a chart is to first select the data. Now there are different ways. It's Microsoft. Excel is Microsoft, so there are always different ways to do things. But the easiest is to select the data on your spreadsheet and then tell Excel you want to turn it into a chart. Now we just went through all the different chart types. If I wanted to create a chart based on comedy, thriller, documentary, and romance, so that's 4 different categories or series of information across 12 months, January, February, March, April, May. So basically all this data. I would not create a pie chart based on that, because a pie chart is based on one category or one series of information. So comparing your comedy, thriller, documentary, romance just for January, this area there, that would be great for a pie chart. So it creates a pie chart and shows you how much each of these genres, how big it is compared to the whole of all of January together, the 86,000. But if I wanted to do it based on all of the months, all of the genres, a column chart would be the best for that. So the first thing you do is you select your data. What I'm going to do is I'll create a column chart. How about we do that? Now, when you select your data, don't just select the numbers, because yes, it will create the chart, but then you'll have no idea what month these numbers are for, because you didn't select the labels on the top. So you'll have no idea that the 37,283 was for comedy for the month of April, because you didn't select the labels that go with the numbers, the descriptors kind of. So what I would do in this case is I would select here from A2 to M6. It'll just skip movie genre. It doesn't need that, but it does need to know what each of your rows are for, the different genres, and it needs to know what each of your columns are for, the different months. And then you're inserting a chart. So you go up to your insert ribbon, and you have all the different chart types here. If you're just starting out with charts and you still don't know what chart is best for the data, you don't know what would be the best to tell your story, there is a button for recommended charts, and it will give you, if I click on it, it will look at the data that you selected and it will give you a whole bunch of options. It'll say, well, you could use this line chart or this column chart or this area chart. And it gives you a whole bunch that you can choose from. Oh, look at the funnel chart you could use. And you could choose one from there. If you already know what type of chart, like I already know that I want to create a column chart, then you have 3 little rows of chart buttons here with the different main chart types. So if I go and click on the first one here, which is the column chart, there are a bunch of different subtypes of column charts. And by the way, it does kind of combine charts into one button. So I showed you that there were column charts and there are also bar charts. Well, you're not going to find a button that shows you a bar chart, but if you click on the column chart button, the first 2 rows are to create column charts, but the last 2 rows are bar charts. And you can mouse over each of the different subtypes to see which chart would work best for you. I'm just going to go with a standard. I'll do it. I know I told you that 3D doesn't represent very well, but we'll make it fancy. We'll do a 3D clustered column chart. So here is my chart, which I can resize. You can move it around. And by the way, if you move your chart, I suggest putting your cursor near the border of the chart because everything on your chart is its own little piece. So if I happen to be over the title and I try to move the chart, I'd be moving the title. So I would suggest you put your cursor right near the border, outside border of the chart before you move it. And then you can resize it. I usually use the corners to resize, but there's your chart. I don't have a ton of time to show you all the ins and the outs of charts. I mean, we show you in the Excel Level 2 class, we do a whole chapter on charts that really get you on your feet. We have the Mastering Charts in Excel, which is the full day course of charts. And then we have that custom data visualizations chart course. Obviously, you would really learn charts in any of those courses. Here, I just have a couple of minutes, but I can at least steer you in the right direction. So one thing I will tell you is that everything that's on your chart is called a chart element. A chart element means it's just something that makes up your chart, like a chart title. The columns, the series here that you see are chart elements. The legend is a chart element. Anything that makes up your chart is a chart element. And when you want to edit anything about your chart, the easiest way to do that is to use your chart ribbons. I'm just actually, my Zoom screen is covering my menus. I'm going to have to pull this down a little bit. So I don't know if that's what you guys can see, but I can't see my menus. Your ribbons up here at the top, way down at the very end of all your ribbons, you have 2 ribbons for charts. One is called chart design, or if you're in the earlier versions of Excel, it'll just be called design, I think. And format. Format is not really specific to charts. You will get this format ribbon anytime you insert things into your document like shapes, pictures, that kind of thing. If you insert a shape, then you get this format ribbon where you can change the shape fill, the shape outline, that type of thing. The reason this format ribbon popped up is a chart is just made of shapes. These columns that you see are actually just shapes. It's like you went and inserted rectangles on their side kind of thing. So you'll get this format ribbon so you can change individual shapes, their colors, their shading, their lines. But it's really not your main chart ribbon. Your main chart ribbon is the design ribbon, the chart design ribbon. This is where you're going to go to tweak your chart. And half the chart design ribbon is taken up with making your chart look pretty, like you've got built-in chart styles. So if you don't have a lot of time to play around with your chart, but you want to make it look pretty, you've got a bunch of built-in styles. You can change colors. You've got different color schemes. You have quick layouts that change the placement of those chart elements I was talking about. So if you want your legend to the right, you can choose a quick layout that flips your legend to the right, puts a title at the top, that kind of thing, or this one that puts the title and the legend on top. So it's quick ways of changing the location of those different elements. But if you really want to get your hands into the nitty gritty, let me maximize this again, the nitty gritty of your charts, the very first button called Add Chart Element is what you're looking for. This is probably the most important button on your chart ribbon. This is where you make all the tweaks to your chart and you do them yourself. So instead of using a quick layout, maybe I know I want my chart title to the right of my chart, or sorry, my chart legend to the right of my chart. I can go down to legend and I can choose right. And then it takes my legend and it puts it up here to the right. So this is getting your hands into all the individual sort of, like I said, nitty gritty details of the chart, just to steer you in that direction. Down the end of the ribbon, I don't have a lot of time to get into things like select data, switch row column, but you can change your chart type. So if you decide that you don't like the column chart, you wish you had chosen a bar chart or something else, you can just change your chart type and you've got all the different categories here. And if you want to move your chart, you can see that the chart is put on the same sheet as your data. It doesn't have to be. Maybe you have a dashboard and you want to now put this on your dashboard sheet. You could go up to Move Chart and you can choose one of the other sheets that you can move it to, or you could put it on a brand new sheet if you want. I don't actually use the Move Chart button. I usually just cut and paste. You can just select your chart, cut it, paste it. It does the same thing. 6 of one, half a dozen of the other kind of thing. And then just to point out these little buttons to the right of your chart, these were added in the 2013 version of Excel. These are just duplicates of what you find up on that chart ribbon I was just pointing out. Like this little plus symbol is to add chart element. It's the same thing as going up here to add chart element, that button that I showed you where I moved my legend. I could have gone over here and clicked this little plus symbol, gone to legend and click this little triangle and then choose, I want it at the bottom now. The only thing is I find at least this one button kind of cumbersome to work with because you have to do extra clicking. I had to click this little triangle to get to the locations. And then once I chose bottom, it doesn't collapse my menus. I have to go back and click on this little plus symbol to then collapse it. So for my chart elements, I usually use the Add Chart Element button up here, but then the other two buttons here are kind of handy. The second one is, well, chart styles, maybe not so much. I do usually use my chart styles up on my ribbon, but you have them available here. It's the third button that's kind of handy. It's the chart filters, where maybe I don't want to see the month of January and February. I could go down here and deselect January and February and click apply. And now I'm not looking at those on my chart. I can put them back. There are other ways to do this, but this little button actually is handy. That's the one that I use the most over on the right. I find I don't use these other two buttons. I usually default to going up to the ribbons at the top. But no matter what, wherever your chart is, it is based on this data. And if any of the data changes, your chart will update because it's based on this data. So hopefully that gives you enough information about what you have to think about in before you even set up your charts. Think about the story you're telling. Keep it clear, keep it simple, choose the right chart to tell your story. And then we threw in sort of a step-by-step in how to actually create your chart. So the last thing that I'll do for you guys, just in case you're interested in any of these chart courses, is I've taken you over to the Great Canadian Training website, and I'll go to courses. And I'll narrow it down to the Microsoft courses just to make it easier rather than switch to all courses. And I'll go to Excel. And we have, of course, our level 1, 2, and 3. If you want to do a level 2, you will get a chapter on creating charts. It's a really good foundation for creating charts. That will really get you on your feet. But we also have, as I scroll down, the Mastering Charts and Graphs in Excel. That's the full day course where you will create every one of those charts that I showed you. And you'll learn how to create a chart from scratch. So you don't have to take the level 2, that one chapter, to be able to take the Mastering Charts and Graphs. We will start from scratch in the Mastering Charts and Graphs. And then we have that new course, the Custom Data Visualizations in Excel, where it will start off with your basic charts just to make sure everybody's comfortable in creating charts. It will teach you how to work with your shapes, adding shapes, working with your fills and lines, layering your shapes, and then it will combine the two into creating some of those really cool custom charts that I showed you guys. So this is going to be a really good course. And then don't forget, if you're on our site, you can't miss going to the free resources. Our free resources, we have the free podcasts that Joel runs. We have free downloads. We have the webinars, of course. As you guys know, you can get a list by clicking on the register button. So the next webinar will be giving feedback like a leader, not a critic. Power Up with, oh yes, I'm doing the Power Up with Power Query. If you're interested in what Power Query is, I was talking about the different Power Apps. There you go. You can get an idea of what Power Query is like. Okay. So hopefully that gives you enough to get going, get you on your feet. Thank you everybody for checking out our September webinar.